Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. This panel is going to be kind of fun, I think. We're talking about horror and romance, a combination that people don't seem to at least recognize very often, but it lives, it's breathing, it's real. So why don't we get started? I'm going to start with the first person I see on my screen, and that's Michelle. Can you just introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. I'm Michelle Lane, and I write horror and dark fantasy. And there's usually an element of romance in the work that I do.
Yeah. Penelope.
I'm Penelope Flynn. I write in horror, science fiction, dark fantasy, dark fiction, erotica, and erotic romance. And of course, those things, find their way into, my writing. Generally, my horror is going to have either some serious erotic romance or erotica in it. And I just think they go together really well.
Mm-hmm. Gini.
I am Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Dog Books, and I also write under 6 other pen names, including JC Koch, where I write horror, and I definitely put horror in romance. I think the monster deserves to get the girl or the boy.
Nice. Did you say 6 pen names?
Yeah, so far. There's another one that's just that it looks like I'm going to have to pull out because of some stories I'm submitting. So yeah. It's a controlled form. It's a controlled form of schizophrenia. I make it work for me.
There we have it. Rhonda.
My name is Rhonda Jackson Garcia, and I write horror under RJ Joseph and romance under Rhonda Jackson Joseph. I don't typically write horror and romance together at the same time, but I do love them both equally. So there's that.
And last but not least, our only guy on the panel. I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm not sure what's in store for you, Hal.
I am Hal Bodner. I'm probably best known for Bite Club, which was my first novel, gay vampire novel. So technically it's horror, although I always have considered it more of a thriller caper kind of piece. I'm known as a horror writer. I've been nominated for the Stoker a couple of times. And I actually, when romance first started becoming big, I wrote a bunch of romances. So I have a background in both genres. And I have mixed the two of them.
I love, just off the top, I love how comfortable we all are with it. We're like, yeah, of course. What? Horror, romance is just the perfect marriage. And it's true. I mean, to me, at least, right? I wrote this article a little while ago, maybe 2 years ago, I think, that talked about how horror and romance were so closely linked, and because they're both rooted in these strong emotions of desire and need. I mean, I think that you can't really separate them. They're kind of straddling the line together. I called them long separated twins, which was kind of fun.
Or you can just wait until the bars are about to close at 2:00 and go home with somebody. And sometimes you accidentally mix horror and romance.
That's exactly right. Exactly. And so I wrote that the two sort of require a stretching of the soul. Okay. What do you think about that? How, when you approach it in your writing, do you think that sort of stretch is sort of in parallel with each other, and it makes sense because, just because of the nature of the emotions involved?
Well,
anybody?
I think that pretty much everything I write has romance in it. Not every single thing, but mostly, because I think it's a part of life. We aren't here without the romance of our parents and our grandparents and our greats and et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like it's an intrinsic part of making well-rounded characters. In terms of horror, for me, I look at those characters, be they a monster or a monstrous human, and say, what do they want? Well, pretty much everything wants to be loved. And so even a monster can want to be loved. Even somebody doing horrible things can want to be loved. Many people do horrible things because they've lost love. So I think they're very tightly tied to each other. I'm not as fond of the horror movie trope of, you had sex, so you have to die. That's very Puritan. I can't even get the word out right, but we all know what I'm trying to say. And I'm against it. So I think you should be able to have sex with whatever you want as long as you're not harming something innocent or helpless.
Exactly.
Children and animals really off limits. But beyond that, I think if you want to love a monster because that monster is the thing you needed, then go for it.
Yeah. I think, in fact, I think about things like The Bride of Frankenstein. I mean, isn't that like the quintessential romantic horror? You know, we have this monster who desires a relationship. He, of course, coerces, does everything he can in order to force this thing, you know, to come forth because he's so desperate for love, so desperate to have this, you know, someone just like him that he will, you know, have this beautiful relationship with. Of course, we know how that works out for him, not very well, and not for anybody. It doesn't work out very well for anyone involved, but it is a true, you know, romantic horror. I mean, if you think about even like Jane Eyre, which you think of as, you know, some, you know, horror aspect. I think putting somebody in, you know, in a room, you know, by themselves, you know, I think that's kind of horrible. And I think, you know, those little aspects also, I think, have horror in them, but still you have this underlying, this big blossoming romance, but this undercurrent of betrayal and distrust, which, you know, I know it's not classic, you know, monster horror, but there's still an element of horror in that to me.
Yeah, I have a completely different take on it. Having been widowed 1.5 times, I think that probably the most horrible thing is not the monsters and the demons and the alien creatures and the serial killers, but I think that true horror, I mean, if gutsy horror is you lose a child, you lose a spouse, you lose a dog, that type of stuff. And a lot of my short fiction deals with, my short horror fiction deals with that kind of stuff with a supernatural overlay. So for me, if you're talking about horror and romance, the truly horrific part of it for me is the loss of it. And even in the first romance I wrote, which would have been Flesh and Stone, which technically isn't a romance because it sort of doesn't have a happy ending, but sort of does. I mean, they're together, but they're dead. So, you know, but even in something like that, I think the horror is the loss, not the fact that there's, you know, a critter coming from under the bed to eat them, you know, like Freddy Krueger or anything.
Interesting. You know, Penelope, you said something that really triggered something for me. The whole concept of Gothic fiction, it's romance and horror. Yeah. It is, you know.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about it that way, which is kind of funny because, I mean, you'd think I would have considered that, but no. But as you bring it up, all of those, well, not all, but most of those stories have that sort of undercurrent of, yes, you've got the creepy house. Yes, you've got something supernatural happening and no one knows what's happening there. But then there's this love interest.
Exactly.
You know, and then we it's almost equal parts of the story where we focus on that.
Well, you also you're talking about Gothic fiction. I mean, women in Gothic fiction were sexual. And they, of course, had to be punished.
Yeah, of course.
Because they were sexual, because women weren't. So there's that element too.
Well, Gothic literature is like the parent of horror and of romance. You know, like just really technically, and I talk to my students about this a lot when they start to examine genres for their semester projects. Like the romance people kind of end up pairing up with the horror people because they have the same roots in the Gothic writing. And so, you know, they just kind of veered a little bit, but they were sprung, they were birthed from the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're talking about really big emotions and sensationalism in a time when I can't imagine how boring it must have been to be alive at that time. I mean, you need to have some kind of excitement like that. And what's more exciting than monsters and sex?
Right. Together.
That's the quote of the day.
Yes.
Hey, Michelle, you're talking about during Victorian times, during Gothic times?
Yeah.
Yeah, but didn't you have stable boys to keep you company if you were that bored?
There was that. There's that as well.
But you had to be
careful. Into
careful.
the story, the love interest, you know.
Yeah. who gets the stable boy gets eaten by the monster.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Show of strength, all that stuff. I mean, this stuff is working. I mean, it's all connecting. So,
well, when I write my series that I'm working on now is Renfield's. And Renfield, of course, is a character from Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I started years ago trying to put this together in my head, you know, that what if there was not just one Renfield, but a whole family of them whose job it is to maintain these revenants, these individuals who we think of as vampires. And so this whole concept that people on the screen, those are Renfields. And so they have this business entity, but you know, they live so long, just like revenants live so long, that generally a lot of their interactions are with each other. You know, so you have a whole lot of this person was with this person, now they're with this other person, the other person, but the background of everything they do is horror because they interact with everything that is supernatural and, you know, that life of, you know, dealing with the blood and the killing and all these, but still, you know, it's all, you know, their lives and there's love and there's romance and then more blood and killing.
Right.
And it all, you know, kind of mixes together.
That's that concept of the familiar, which is always so interesting to me because that person gets so wrapped into the beast that they're taking care of that they lose themselves in terms of who they are and what they're interested in.
My Renfields are hybrids. They're vampires and human. They are like the Dompiers, but you know, they're not vampire hunters. They are the opposite. They're caretakers.
Yeah. Oh wow, how neat.
I mean, look at Let the Right One In. I mean, that's kind of what that's about.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very, very neat.
Well, honestly, I mean, Buffy and Angel, in those series, vampires are very clearly demons, and yet we're still watching a lot of, and I mean, Spike and Drusilla, and Spike is probably the most romantic character in both shows.
Absolutely. I loved Spike. He was my favorite character. Spike
even though he's awful.
You're my favorites. Yeah, but I love them. You were my favorite.
Yeah, but I think we always like the awful ones. You know, interestingly enough, I have a question that's so basic that's later, but I'm going to ask it now. So is there such a thing as a sexy beast?
Oh, please.
Angels.
Oh, please.
Wasn't it? It was so simple.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yes, of course.
But if you talk to people outside of what we do, they're like, oh, what are you talking about? I mean, the vampire they're thinking about is not the vampire I'm thinking about.
I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true. I mean, women threw themselves at Bela Lugosi.
True.
And he was not an attractive man.
No. You know, there's someone for everyone.
Being human. Aiden Turner and being human. My gosh.
Oh my
God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Can I order a pair?
No joke. No joke.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to go right back to Spike and Angel and every Spike, Angel, every Nick Knight. Okay.
Eric Northman.
Alone shows
Eric Northman. Yes, absolutely.
You know, and I think that's on purpose because we romanticize vampires, but let's talk about a different beast. I mean, that's an easy beast. They look human, kind of.
Nosferatu.
What else?
Nosferatu.
Give me a whole other kind of.
Well, no, have you seen what Nosferatu looks like?
For Nosferatu.
Well, how about Disney? Disney's Beauty and the Beast.
Exactly.
I mean, we watch a lot of Disney around here. Of course, with context, you know, we got to talk about these things. But I mean, Beauty and the Beast, beast. I mean, if I wasn't married and all, you know.
Really? I mean,
is he thinking about it? Yeah.
Is he sexy?
I think I would date him. Oh my God.
There's something about him.
There's something about his the way that he is personified. Right. But there's also that vulnerability, like especially when he starts to realize that he can't be all bluster with Belle, right? And he starts to kind of try to humble himself, and you can actually see that effort. I'm like, man, that's pretty sexy right there.
I think that's the difference between men and women. I think that's the difference between men and women. Would
it be okay if we have Gaston as a jump off? Would that be all right?
See, Gaston is just so rude and just
the jump off. That's all.
Yeah.
If he had to talk, can he just not talk, and then maybe we can play with him.
Right. But Hal has an interesting point I'm interested to pursue. So you think that's the difference between men and women, just the physicality of the sexiness, or what?
Oh, I would have taken Gaston 20 million times faster than the Beast.
Okay.
But I think women are much more concerned with, I don't know, there's a reason I think why the romance readership tends to be female and gay men. Because, straight men are very, they're not in, most of them, I'm going to make a generalization, but they're not into the whole, vulnerability, blah, 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 blah. I mean, they want, kazungas and whatever else, and they're happy.
Yeah.
And I think that's a cultural thing.
Well, you know what? But the thing is funny is that that's the way, I find myself to be very visual. I am very visual. I like good looking men. I post my photos. My men are beautiful, gorgeous. My women are beautiful, gorgeous. I think that women for a long time have been told we are not visual. We are more maternal. We do it. And I think that's the lie, and that a lot of women feel that they have to fall into that, which is why I think, yes, that you have romance, but a lot of romance, that Gothic romance, that erotic romance, that's the way that women are turning. Because, we said, oh yeah, it's just romance, 50 Shades of Grey, that's all. Right? Romance in there, So, I think women are a lot more willing to roll in that direction. It's just that a lot of times I think it's not appropriate.
Or even if you think about mermaids, like the attraction to mermaids, they're creatures. They do have the bazongas, right? But they have these fish tails, and sometimes they have scales, and sometimes they have kind of weird things going on around here. But man, if I were out at the beach and a mermaid jumped out, I might have to, holler at her too. Come on, man.
Right. Don't forget the original mermaid myth. The original mermaid myth. The original mermaid myth, the sailors were killed. They were punished for that erotic attraction.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Mermaids
are scary.
I don't have an interest in the merman. I'm just like, and why?
Interesting.
It's the same. Well, they're not as beautiful. The mermaids, though, man, they get sparkle and glitter, and they have the hair, and oh man, look.
Y'all are hanging out with the wrong mermaid. They are.
I'm a Ginny. I'm a Ginny.
Yeah. Oh wait, I can make a good looking merman. I got no problem coming up.
Penelope's got it down. Penelope's got it down.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
These are my guys, my Renfield.
Oh, yeah.
They are,
okay.
I think
each and every one of them is beautiful.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I like pretty. I think
Yes.
most people like pretty. I think that's both a good thing and a flaw in all of us. But we all like pretty. It's just happily there are lots of expanded definitions of what is pretty.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
I think it's interesting when we're talking about pretty and we're talking about romance and horror. Does anyone remember? He was the kid that was in Magic Mike, the blonde.
Alex Pettyfer.
He was in a thing called Beastly. And I got to tell you, he was the prettiest beast from Beauty and the Beast that I'd ever seen.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, he looks pretty, but he also looks kind of dumb.
Well,
I'm not saying he is, but he looks kind of dumb.
If you think about this, though, the pretty is one thing, right? And this is true of all of it. If we go back to what we think about romance, it's pretty, but then there's also unattainable. Like, he's hard to get. He's pretty, but he's aloof. He's not throwing himself at you, so you chase him. And he's, I don't know, all these different things. He's womanizing, but you want him to talk to you only, or whatever it is, whatever that is.
Right.
When you look at your horror fiction, are you changing that? Because in horror fiction, we don't always stick to the trope, right? We kind of pave our own way on that side of the genre. When you're doing horror and romance, are you sticking to those love interest tropes? Because in romance, and I didn't know this initially, right? Because I don't read, it's funny because I write some romance in my horror, but I don't read romance exclusively, like just a romance story. I read one and I thought, oh my God, I can't, it was too so many flowers and so much. Yeah, I couldn't. It was done.
You read the wrong one, but
yeah, that's the wrong romance.
Ooh, it was too much, like really. But and it was like no sex too. It was like straight romance, like no.
One of those. Yeah.
I was like,
really read the wrong one.
But anyway, are you talking about romance or are you talking about erotica?
Well,
Because
no,
they're two different things.
absolutely. And I'm saying I read a romance that
Okay.
the
You made a
traditional
mistake and read a
romance.
romance.
I don't like the traditional romance. I can say that now. But what I'm asking is this: romance has a whole lot of expectations, right? You have to, everything has to work out good in the end. If it doesn't work out well, then you're not really writing romance, as I've understood.
Right.
Gotta have that happy ending. Do you follow your male interest, your love interest? Doesn't have to be male, but your love interest has to be strong, and there's got to be angst, and there's got to be all of this stuff in order to be a traditional romance. How are we approaching that when we write our horror, which is kind of free for all? I hate to say that about my genre, but we don't deal with a lot of those tropes.
Well, romance is a format, not a genre.
Okay.
I mean, we call it a genre, but the ones I've written, they gave me style sheets, and I was writing erotic romance. So I had a certain amount of time between that I could write plot and between sex scenes. Basically, there were a certain number. They had to do certain things. You had to have, and I think horror kind of frees you. I think there's a difference between mixing the format of romance and horror, which you can do, and putting romance into horror. I think it's a lot more difficult to put horror into romance because romance is so structured, but it can be done.
How are you handling that? Anyone who's writing that today?
I have a piece that it's a first person POV, and my protagonist does not know until very near to the end of the story that he is the monster. He's crawling up from the depths. And he's so excited to finally have found, the air, the open air and the lights. He doesn't realize he's a ghoul. And he goes to this party that's nearby, and there's a beautiful young woman being terrorized by a very beautiful, handsome man. And ultimately, he saves her. And she, even though he realizes with horror, he's the monster and he's ready to leave, and she runs after him because she, as far as she is concerned, he is what she has prayed for to save her. And they go off together. And, ultimately his ending is ultimately, she's going to the ghoulish community, all the undeads, they take care of her. She's a precious jewel because she doesn't see them as horrible. So I think you can do that. It's probably one of the most romantic pieces I've ever written, but it's absolutely horror.
But that's a romance ending. Definitely. She's written it romance.
That he never thought he'd get, but it's a horror piece, but it is a romantic horror piece. So
whereas if she'd rejected him, or that would be more of in the horror style, I think.
Because of the rules of romance.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I write, there are romantic elements in almost everything I write, and I'm delving more into erotica. Every time I sit down to write, I feel like there's more sex on the page. But the thing about that is that, you're talking about the structure of romance and how there's usually a happy ending or a happy for now if you have a series or whatever, but rarely do my characters have happy endings, which I think is where a lot of the darkness is coming from. You have, mainly two characters, but I'm working on a series right now that the main character she's a succubus, and she's in an arranged marriage to a fallen angel. And they have this long courtship because they cannot consummate their marriage until she turns 100 years old. And because she's a succubus, she has to have sex with other people, and it cannot be him. So I'm having a lot of fun writing it because, their relationship is really complex and complicated, and there's a lot of tragedy. Eventually they're going to end up together, but it's going to take a lot of time and patience for them because they are not allowed to have intercourse during that 100-year time period. So yeah, I mean, I love romance, but only, and this is, maybe this is a confession, but I am only interested in romance if there are monsters present.
Here's the thing, Michelle.
I don't care about human beings having a happily ever after. That is boring. I don't care.
But see, if you're not writing,
I want vampires, I want demons, I want fallen angels.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, but Michelle, if you're not writing a happy ending, you may be writing something very romantic, but you're not writing romance.
See, that's the weirdness about the readers, is we don't deal in that in horror, like not as much.
Right.
And so that's the problem. And that's why I posed the question, because I found that to be restrictive. I don't think I think I write romantic elements. There's some sex on the page.
Yes.
But there's the happy endings not happening. I write psychological horror. There's nothing happy here. And I'm not gonna change it for that. So to which case I don't think that I just wonder the romance distinction is going to be elusive for someone like me. And I wondered how you made that work.
Look, Fatal Attraction is not a romance.
No, it's not. It does not follow the tropes.
You didn't think that was.
It is not. I mean, I love romance. I love love. I love Beverly Jenkins. Oh my gosh, I'm the biggest Jenkins stan ever in life, right?
Like my sister.
But when it comes to me writing it, I haven't written strictly romance in a long time. And the reason is because that darkness is always creeping in. So I sent a story to Women's World years ago. I don't know if you all remember. Well, if you write romance, that was one of the very few places that took short story romance, right? And so the editor actually sent me a handwritten rejection, which was unheard of, right?
Wow.
Dude,
Nobody could get in if
I
you get
impressed.
Yes. So I was so excited, but she was like, "This is very well written. Just says, but it's so dark. It's too dark for us." And I think that's kind of the thing that I started noticing, even my MFA thesis, I went to Seton Hill as a romance writer, right? And so my thesis is a traditional romance. It has all the beats. However, it is dark. I mean, it's still kind of dark, not dark enough to be called paranormal romance or urban fantasy. But I realized that no matter what I do, that darkness is going to creep in. And so
I don't think there's a problem with putting darkness into romance, as long as it has, I keep harping on this, as long as it has the happy ending. And the reason I harp on it is because I got slammed because I have difficulty writing happy endings. And when you've got a contractor.
But happy is, are they together? I mean, I just wrote a short story where a group of guys kind of gang raped this one partner in a romantic partnership, right? And so her lover turned into a tree and she killed all the men. And then she took her lover's body and she was nourished by her corpse. And to me, that is love. To me, that is the ultimate. It's man, she gave you her heart, body, and soul willingly.
Tell me you're a member of the Horror Writers Association, because that story right there. That's
of course I am.
That's not a romance.
But to me, that is happy. They get to live forever together, entwined in the most intimate of ways.
Rhonda, are you and Hal separated at birth? Because he has a lot of stuff Rhonda and Hal apparently share a brain on this.
That was everything just then. I don't know if you all were listening to that.
I mean,
gosh.
It was, to me, that was just the most, when I think about the ultimate sacrifice, what would you do? Are you willing to turn into a tree for somebody? Yes, that means I love you to death. Right?
I think there's a like I said, it's a very romantic ending. I mean, like I said, when I wrote Flesh and Stone, they end up dead. They end up trapped in a pair of statues. But they're going to be together forever, and they're okay with that.
I love that. To me, that is love.
But your average romance reader doesn't see it that way.
That's what I was going to say, Hal. That was my next point, because we're all excited about how awesome that is. Romance readers are like, no, where's the romance? White picket fence. That's what they're looking for. So how do you find readers who are willing to handle love and love looked at it from a different lens. I mean, because honestly, everything you just mentioned, right? I like to twist some words. That was
yeah,
it.
yeah.
You know, but I'm just saying, how do you look at that? You know, how do you find these readers and get them to understand this is love, just not the whatever you were looking for?
Well,
you write in a different genre. I mean, I think Gini, when you wrote Plush Life, Gini, that's definitely a romance. I mean, they end up that's a happy ending.
Suspense.
And there's some dark shit in that.
But
very much.
Penelope, what were you going to say? Because you were going to mention something about that direct thing. Because writing a different genre, that's easy to say, but difficult when this is what you are and who you are and what you write.
Well, you know, it's kind of funny that those of us who say, yeah, we like the horror with some horror in it, but a lot of us like shifters. And I think the concept of the shifter is very appealing to us because we get to ride that edge of the one, because I think the biggest deal for me, a lot of people, werewolves versus vampires. But the reason I like a vampire is because they can talk to me. You know? And so
Charlene doesn't write romance. Charlene Harris doesn't write romance, I don't think.
No.
She did before. She did before Susie
Yeah, she used to. Yeah, she used to. But I think that the main thing, though, in finding those readers is, first of all, not to try to trick romance readers. Like, romance readers are very, very smart. I mean, brilliant. And so you don't try to trick Romance Landia and say, oh, this is a romance, cause baby, they gonna get you. And they're
not tolerant.
No, they're not.
But they should, because that's kind of a bait and switch. I mean, unless you're doing something like I say, like a LA Banks's Vampire Huntress series was like the best thing ever in life. When I say just, oh my gosh, the most wonderful thing. And of course it was a romance. It was an overarching love story. It had these black, dark moments. It had the whole you meet, you break up. We don't know if they're getting back. And then at the end, but she told readers up front with that label, hey, this is paranormal romance or urban fantasy. I can't remember. Things have changed so much. I'm kind of old, right? But the label clearly said that to let you know up front, I'm not trying to trick you. I'm not trying to pull a bait and switch. This is what it is. Come ride with me. And some people will. I don't know that as hard as we tried, there are some people that just ain't gonna ride with horror. They just ain't.
Oh,
and that's fine, because if you're not, if you're not ride or die, I kind of think we don't need you on the team anyway.
So,
why make someone suffer?
You know, when someone says paranormal romance or dark fantasy, dark fiction, I'm probably going to pick that up. You know, I'm probably going to read that. If they said it's straight romance, I'm not going to read that. In fact, one of my Roxanne Bland wrote a book, and it was Invasion was the second one. The first one was The Underground. The Underground blew my socks off. I love that book. But she did Invasion because so many people, I think, have issues with sexual content that she really, kind of contracted on the sexual content. And I'm kind of like, wait a minute, what happened to all my sex? My werewolf sex, what happened to that, man?
Right.
It's like, but because there was a whole lot of it in the first book, and it was really well done. And so I miss that. I miss that.
I mean, it's funny. Rhonda mentions Leslie Banks, and I knew Leslie fairly well. And she was a doll. I've never read her, believe it or not, but we talks a lot, and I remember her. She wasn't comfortable writing erotica. She was much more comfortable writing horror than she was writing erotica. And she would say that whenever she was asked to write anything that was at all erotic, she was embarrassed that somebody in her family might read it.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, the horror was okay. The horror was okay, but the erotica embarrassed her.
And that's the way I was too. I mean, my mom, had a short story in one of Zane's anthology. And I told my mom, do not read it.
No, Mama,
All my sisters read it. I told my mother, do not read it.
My mother read my first novel, and I forgot what was in that part. And I was like, oh God, well, all right, listen. But Michelle, you were going to say something a second ago. We were both kind of nodding, listening to what was being said. Go ahead.
So two things. So back to what Penelope was saying about werewolves and sex. So here's something. One of my favorite novels ever is Glenn Duncan's The Last Werewolf. And it is definitely a horror novel, without doubt. It is a horror novel. It is told from the perspective of an old werewolf who is essentially the last one on Earth. And he is getting bored with life, and he is deciding that he's just going to wrap it up and allow the people who've been hunting him to just catch him. But interestingly enough, there is another one, and it happens to be a woman. And then all of a sudden, the book is a romantic novel, a romance between werewolves. And one of the absolute best scenes in the entire book is when they are together as werewolves for the first time. They kill together, they rip things apart, and then they have sex in the midst of all this horror.
As one does.
Beautiful and fantastic. It is romantic, but it is definitely a horror novel, without doubt. I highly recommend it. The other thing is that, you know, I think it's interesting that you'd be more embarrassed to have someone read a story where people are having sex as opposed to, you know, a story where someone is getting either stabbed to death or literally, rendered apart by someone's bare hands. So my first novel is it's a supernatural slave narrative, and there's all kinds of graphic violence and sexual violence. There are monsters, and the monsters are better company for my main character than the humans that she's around all the time because she's a slave. But the monsters they're handsome and they're charming, but they are monsters. Like they are not going to be her happily ever after. And so, like Rhonda, that was my thesis novel from the MFA program at Seton Hill. And the entire time I was writing it, people kept telling me that I wasn't writing a horror novel. I wasn't writing a horror novel. People kept wanting to tell me that I was writing a paranormal romance because there's a vampire as one of the main characters. Well, that's bullshit. Okay, just because there's a vampire doesn't mean that it's paranormal romance.
Right.
He might have an interest in her. He might be trying to woo her, but she's not fooled by what he's doing, and she's not gonna play the game. Vampires are monsters.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what genre they're in, they're still going to behave like monsters.
Well, they should,
They should. They don't always, but they should.
Yeah, but they should.
They don't always,
should.
But that's every writer's prerogative.
Because of my background, I definitely identify more with the monsters than I do with, the plain old humans, because let's face it, I mean, most of us, who are, especially those of us who are African American, realize that, people can do some nasty stuff.
Yep.
And sometimes the best thing is like your monster is your protector. A lot of times. It's something the monster that you grow inside yourself is your protector.
Ooh, I love that.
Yes. Well, exactly. Because the label of monstrosity is always placed on Black women, right? We're called monstrous because we talk a little loud. We're called monstrous because we are, country ghetto. We're called monstrous because, we don't smile throughout the whole department meeting, right?
Yes.
And so if you're going to be labeled that way, my thing has always been, you know what? Let's just lean in. Let's lean right on into this label of monstrosity, but mostly so that people that are, especially in my writing, that are reading it can kind of think about, why did we do this? Like, why did we call this mother a monster when she turned her kids into vampires because racism was going to kill them anyway?
Yeah,
right.
And at least this time they can defend themselves.
Sure.
Sure.
There's power. The monster is the strongest person in the whole place.
Exactly.
Who wouldn't want to be? I've always wanted to be the monster when I was a kid. I'm like, I don't want to be the princess. I don't even want to be the knight. I want to be the monster.
It's interesting how the definition of monster. It's interesting how the definition of the monster has changed over time. I think that starting with I would say probably Anne Rice in 78 We have this notion of the attractive monster, the desirable monster. And before then, you really didn't get that very much. You know, I mean, I remember when I made a bet with John Skip and Brian Keene way back at the height of the erotic vampire age, where they bet me that I couldn't write an erotic zombie novel because pieces were falling off and everything. This is before anybody had ever even thought of writing an erotic zombie novel. And I learned two things from that. I learned, one, never write a novel on a bet, because the book is For Love of the Dead, and it's the book that I wrote that is terrible. I mean, it's got some good moments, but it's a terrible book. And the other thing is, I think that you define your monster differently depending on what genre you're writing. For example, if I was writing horror, I would very likely do the Light of the Living Dead kind of zombie. My idea of zombie, because I don't watch zombie movies and I'm not into that, was this gorgeous cafe au lait skin guy running around on an island beach with a loincloth that I could do anything to. Oh. You know, he was just this gorgeous Caribbean guy.
Yeah, you went more for the Haitian zombie.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that for me was what that was about. And I think that's a very much more of a romantic attitude towards this, and you can get a romance out of that than the people with limbs falling off. I mean, there's not anything really, you got to stretch for that.
Yeah, and that's, to me, and I want to talk a little bit about this. I hate all these genres are getting on my nerves now. Subgenres, genres. I really have had enough. Rhonda, you were saying you're over it. Likewise. But paranormal romance. Let's talk a little bit about that, because to me, it's like a catch-all. It doesn't even make sense. You know, so for someone who doesn't write horror and romance much, I think there's more erotica. Like I said, there's sex on the page. It's not a ton of romance, even though, you know, that's there. This paranormal romance catch-all is confusing to me, but it seems to be the space for where there's not going to be the happy ending, and we can have whatever darkness we want.
No, I write paranormal romance.
Yeah, it does have to still have the happy ending, though, because
if
it is
the word
romance.
If the word romance is there, it must have a happily ever after or happy for now.
Well, yes. Well, they have to. First of all, it has to fit those tropes. That whoever's involved in the romance, they have to meet. Whoever's involved in the romance, they have to get to know each other. Whoever's involved in the romance, they have to break up. Whoever's involved in the romance have to get back together. And then there has to be a happy for now or a happily ever after. So it is sort of a space, like you say, Lisa, for those of us maybe who tend toward more darkness, but I've never been able to master. I wrote a short story that was an erotic paranormal romance, and I think that was as good as I could make it, because I just don't, my horror writing brain doesn't work the same as my romance writing brain at all. And so for me to even try to merge the two together, I can have romantic elements in horror all day long. But that was one of my main reasons for getting, one of the main reasons for getting a pen name to write horror, because I didn't want romance readers to even get confused and think if I pick this up, it's going to be sort of the same. No, man, no. Like in my horror, I'm going hard. Like it is hardcore horror. You can't mix it up.
I think Gini and Rhonda are 100% dead on. I mean, it's real. Romance is so restrictive. Which is what I could not, I finally said, I can't write this. Not because I didn't like writing the sex, although that gets boring after a while too. I mean, you know, as I said to Gini once, it shoots, it arcs, it spatters, it drips, and that's about all it does, right? But the genres are very it's very specific in those genres. Let me share something with you. I once had somebody come to me and commission a piece, and they were doing cross genres. And they wanted me to do, it was a noir anthology, so we're a little off topic, but I'll get back on the topic. And he wanted me to do a romance noir mashup. And I couldn't do it, because romance by definition he gets the girl or she gets the guy.
Right.
Noir, by definition, they don't.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So where's that mashup? Where's the sweet spot for these folks who want to write what we're talking about, but don't have this happy
But
ending?
you bring elements of romance into the other genre.
I hear
And
you.
you know
but if
what?
I'm
But think
wrong,
about it. Well, no, it
Go ahead,
can't be done because think about it.
I think so.
Blade Runner is noir.
Blade Runner is
Blade
noir.
Runner is
Okay,
also
okay.
romance, and the guy gets the girl. In the film version, the guy gets the girl, and it's noir and it's romance.
Mhm.
But so if
But
you
it's
have
hard.
a reader who is interested, if you are a horror author
Mhm.
and you have readers who are interested in your horror work and you're not going to do a pen name and you just want to put your work out there, and this piece has romance in it. I mean, this is
Then
like,
it has romance in it. Then it has romance. in it.
Exactly. Jeannie's right.
Then it has romance in it. So what?
Because I'm-
You're trying to identify. Keep in mind, genres only exist
Mhm.
for bookstores and libraries.
Exactly.
That's the only
Exactly.
reason they exist. Otherwise, it's just fiction.
Yes.
Okay. So stop. What you're trying to do, though, is make the genre, and you don't have to. I'm with Hal and Michelle and Rhonda, and I think all of us, Penelope too. You write the genre that you want to write, and if it has romantic elements, it has romantic elements.
Yeah.
Okay. I also write funny. If it's got humorous elements, it's got humorous elements. If my monster is going to be cracking jokes while he's cracking heads, so be it. That's the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't, and then you let your agent, your publisher, or if you're self-publishing, your critique group help you determine how you tag it. And even so, readers are going to tag it differently. When I was writing the first book, Touched by an Alien, is the first of my Alien series. It's the book that gave me a career. Okay. I thought I was writing a fun paranormal romance. I'm not. Why? Because Alien, it's science fiction.
Yeah.
Daw said, oh, this is a science fiction story. I am science fiction. I can be categorized as humorous science fiction romance, action science fiction, but science fiction is always there. So I think for those of us that are putting romance into horror, it's horror with romantic elements, a romantic subplot, a romantic this. And because you've got the main genre of horror or mystery or noir or whatever, you don't necessarily have to have a happily ever after, or it even, and really Blade Runner, they only have a happily for now. You know that ain't gonna work. Okay, right. But you don't even have to have it because you have the romantic elements, but your main genre, you follow more of the tropes in that. So I would say it's something not to worry about.
Jeannie, I think Jeannie's may not, I don't think even skipping over isn't even the right word, but I think one of the things that was related to what you're saying is Amazon. Amazon has those categories, okay? So that and everybody wants to be a bestseller. And you know what? If you're going to be the bestseller in Amish, mermaid, erotic, gender neutral romance,
you can say you're number one and I'll take it.
Exactly. But here's the thing, Lisa. And here's the thing. When you're talking about romance and we're talking about elements and things like this, if you're writing a novel, okay, and you don't have mystery elements in your novel, okay, you're writing a really boring book.
Right.
Because as authors, our craft is designed to drive the reader forward. Why? Because they want to know stuff. There's an element of mystery. It's why they talk to beginning writers all the time about info dumps. Don't info dump. Parcel it out, okay? So whenever we're writing, whatever genre we're writing, it's got to be mystery. We've got to have an element of mystery.
Right.
That doesn't mean we're writing a mystery.
Right.
Okay. And so I think the same is with romance. I mean, you can, and I think that's the difference. But I think when you're talking about, the romance genre itself, I have difficulty writing it. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but it's way too restrictive for me.
It is. I could only manage it either as the romantic subplot or in the case of Plush Life, like you mentioned earlier, that's romantic suspense. I couldn't make a straight romance work. It's a skill set I don't possess properly. Right. I can make other kinds of romance work without any problem, but if it's a straight romance, that's all that's happening. No, I'm not even doing it well in a short story, let alone it's something else for me in the way I write has to be there. And that's
absolutely. We're talking about a genre where even the covers are formulaic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
but everybody likes
as a reader. Well, as a reader, I really appreciate the genre designations simply because when I'm in those moments where I want to read something, and because the one thing a lot of people may not know about me is I'm a huge boxing fan. Okay, I know that's crazy. I hate violence, but I love boxing.
What do you mean? I am also a huge boxing fan.
I love boxing.
Crazy, so.
And so my husband is always laughing at me because I love boxing, but I don't like UFC fighting.
No, really? I like UFC and not boxing.
Well, see, and the reason is because boxing gives us very straightforward rules.
Exactly.
It's pretty controlled as much as it can be when people are beating the heck out of each other, right?
No kicking.
But when no kicking, no biting, no screaming, no scratching, no peeling off the skin. There are very serious rules, right? But as a reader,
I'm like, listen, I'm not trying to kill dude. I just want to see a fight.
Exactly. And as a reader, though, sometimes I choose chaos. So I want horror. To me, horror is chaos.
You're just a bunch of bloodthirsty bitches. I mean, my God.
Yes.
Shorts.
Yes.
And he's right. I'm sorry to say. I mean,
and as a writer and reader, when I want something that's relatively controlled, I'm gonna read a romance because I know that what I can expect. Right. And I think that's why I have a hard time writing it nowadays, though, is because my life is anything but controlled. Like there's just mass chaos in every avenue. And so what this life actually fits better right now is horror. And so that's why I'm a lot more productive on the horror side.
Rhonda, are you saying that you like the consistency of it?
I like the consistency of romance. I do. I love it. Like regardless of who the characters are, what their jobs are, who their mamas are, where their people come from, there's always going to be these things. And sometimes I need that. Sometimes I need that dependability. Like you never know when you go into a horror what you're gonna get. Like I remember reading my very first zombie novel was one from Brian Keene. And he was my introduction into zombie fiction. And when I say it, I was hurt in my spirit when I got to the end and like everybody died, because I didn't know that was what that subgenre did, right? My feelings were so hurt, and I thought, I'm never gonna read zombie ever again. Oh, Brian Keene did another novel. Let me go buy that one too. Right? It's about the expectations, but even with zombie novels, you still don't know what you're gonna get. You might get fast zombies, you might get slow zombies, you might get country zombies like Joe Kennedy, I think his name is, used to write Joe McKinney. Right?
McKinney,
yeah. So I mean, I'm old for real. So I mean, romance is controlled within certain aspects. So it's like you get all this variety, but you kind of have this parameter right here.
Yeah.
And so, but for horror, there's no fence, there's no gate. Everybody is going for what they know. And I love that sometimes. And in my writing, I love that. But when I need some comfort, sometimes, I mean, horror is usually my go-to, but sometimes I need that. I need those parameters. I need this control setting. And so romance is always that thing.
Do you read cozy mysteries too, Rhonda? Because they're pretty formulaic.
I don't read cozy mysteries. There's something about, I can't really get into them. I don't know that I haven't read one that actually delved enough into the character of the person, right? Like I like to know more about the characters. In my experience, most mysteries have focused more on everything else. Yes. But I'm a character person. I want to know what the characters are. Where do they come from? Why are they doing that? Why did she cuss him out, even though in her head she's like sweating because he's so fine, right? I want to know why they're doing what they're doing.
So before we run out of time, because our clock we are having so much fun, we're not paying attention to this clock, but let's talk a little bit about sex, because you can't just have this lovey-dovey stuff. When I'm writing, and I call it romance only because I'm a horror author, so I'm not making the distinction between all the different subgenres within romance. I'm just thinking I'm writing something that has love in it. But the sex piece of it, that leans more towards erotica in a lot of ways. But then if you, when we talked about just having a horror that has elements of whatever, sex horror, or sex horror, I can't remember the distinction. There's a subgenre in a horror genre that's like sex horror and
body horror is what is.
Body horror was
I do
different
not like body horror.
This
No,
is
body
sex
horror is different.
I think it's horror erotica is what
Maybe
it, yeah.
but it's not just sex though. It is like violent and vicious. I found it, right? And so that's not what I'm writing. I'm writing.
Yeah, I'm not going to write that.
Vicious,
Sexy.
violent
So
sex.
how
I
do
mean,
you get violent
rough sex, but not.
It's
vicious.
hard to write that stuff in today's world, Lisa. I think that I mean, I know of an author who shall remain nameless. A really good author. I like him. He's a nice guy. And he opens a novel with a woman being pretty graphically raped by a demon.
Yeah, see, man, I don't want it to be like that.
Well, that's exactly what the reading public said when they tried to destroy his career for it.
Oh, wow.
So you have to be careful with that in today's world. Back when Blatty was writing The Exorcist, there was a different environment. You could have, what did she uses a crucifix, doesn't she?
Yeah.
You couldn't do that today.
No.
Well, I know, but you know what? I
Amazing
know what now
being
in the Unflamed, the Unflamed is work I did for Slay, and the beginning of it is with my vampire, my Renfield character, waking up on the ground next to the corpse of a dead and mutilated hooker. Now, you don't see anybody mutilate her. She is just there, and this is the condition she's in when she wakes. And they speak about what happened to the woman, but that stuff, the body horror, I don't mind talking about the I don't know, violence within the monsters doing things, but doing like harm to the human body, that's a lot for me. I mean, people who get into like the whole concept of that gory body horror.
But there's actually a category now of romantic torture porn.
Well, there you have it. The whole thing is a no for me.
There's something for everyone.
Yeah. Well, there's also romantic. Extreme horror. Well, there's also extreme horror where I think that's kind of where we're talking about, where this stuff kind of happens on screen, and like, is it Gini just said there's something for everybody. And I think
but we don't have to write it.
We don't have to write it. But when I think about these things, I think of a story that I wrote that was probably more extreme than I thought it was. I didn't think about it until I actually saw it in print. And the one of the main characters is not necessarily being raped by her husband. He's a demon who wants to procreate. And so she's describing how it felt for him to have sex with her. So where she didn't consent, but he kind of hypnotizes her, right? So it's rape. But in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm writing from my own experiences. I'm writing from my own life. And so for me to have to say, well, we got to take rape off the table, I can't do it. To me, that's horrific. As a rape survivor, I'm like, look, the worst thing is not while it's happening. The worst thing is the after. Right. And so I'm like, I can't take it off the table. But it didn't occur to me until after the story was actually printed in the book. And then I saw like something that one of the editor had said. She was like, yeah, we had thought about having to put content warnings. And I was kind of like, oh, well, okay. But I write the things that are horrific to me.
But you're touching on it.
How it came out, right?
You're touching on a completely different subject, which I think is a relevant subject, but unfortunately we don't have the time, which is the social mores that are developing about things like rape and consent and things like that, which would have been fodder for horror novelists.
Sure.
Are
no longer. You can't do a lot of them anymore.
Well, you know what's
wait, I have a question.
Go on.
I have a question. Is it different if women are writing about it or if men are writing about it?
Well, see, and that's the thing. Like, it's kind of this whole discussion that's going on right now about Black pictures of Black torture in the media, in movies and things like that. I really am an advocate for not canceling these things. Now, do I argue that they can be better written? Of course. If you put material in the hands of somebody that doesn't handle it well, of course it can be terrible. Right. But Michelle, to your point, I feel like if you say to me, you can't write about slavery, you can't write about rape, you can't write about abuse, you can't write about, your husband being a pig, right? Then I can't write about anything. I don't have any other experiences to kind of draw from. And even if I did, they're gonna be homogenous. So I think there is a difference in the handling of it.
But one of the biggest problems we have with that is this. And what it comes down to is that because it's inappropriate for one person to write it, doesn't mean that it's inappropriate for another person to write about it.
Sure.
It's like, it's like that thing they tell you, write what you know. And from this write what you know, unfortunately, before that we get a whole lot of things like what do you call Black exploitation films written by people that didn't know anything about Black people.
Sure. But I think on another subject, I would strongly disagree with that, and here's why. In my own community, we have the gay male community. There's guy-on-guy romance, specific guy-on-guy romance.
Yes.
The overwhelming majority of guy-on-guy gay romance is written by women.
That's not the
There's
same
an
thing.
argument, pardon?
It's not the same thing at all.
Well, I think it is. And I think that if you're going to talk about appropriation on any level, you have to be inclusive on it. But
I think the problem is, again, okay, and I know we're going to get off topic, and I don't want to get way off topic. But see, this to me sounds a little bit about, a white male is going to tell me, a Black female, what it is about.
A gay man. A gay man is telling you how he feels about people who are not gay men writing about gay sex, which they literally know nothing about.
I know that's not what happened. What happened was I talked about Black people, and he told me that I was incorrect. And that's the problem.
Penelope, real quick. The perspective I'm hearing is gay male talking about anyone else that's not a gay male writing gay male literature. So in the connection there, that that's where we should keep it. I think. I don't think it's white male. I think it's gay male. And
absolutely.
Yeah, he's not saying you're wrong. He's not saying you're wrong. He's saying his experience, though, is that there are, literally 75% or more of the people writing male gay romance and erotic are women.
And I don't know. And my point I want to make is I may personally resent that, but I don't know that that's something that I want to announce shouldn't be done. If I can make that distinction, if that makes any sense. I may have personal feelings about it, and I do, but I don't know that I would go so far as to say, because you're a straight woman, you can't write guy-on-guy romance. Where I draw the line personally is when they're masquerading as gay man, but that's a different story. But when we're talking about who writes it, I think that when you're talking about the type of extreme romance, extreme horror, I think you are going to be getting a certain amount of cultural misogyny from men that you're not going to get from a female writer. I also think that in today's, let's say, post-1980s, 1990s, from a female writer, you also may get a vengeful quality that you may not get from a male writer. And I think those are generalizations, but I think that they're cultural trends. And I think we might see those.
Yeah, well, sure. Well, and I think that the bigger picture is, though, and when we start talking about appropriation, because honestly, I feel like everybody can write what they want to write, right? We should be able to do that if you research and you are not being falling into stereotypes. Right. But I think the bigger picture is when we talk about these Black stories that are being told, who's actually writing them, though? Like, are Black people getting the opportunity to write these? So when we talk about male romance, are gay men getting the opportunity to write these? Like, if these opportunities are being taken from within the group and being given to an out group, well, then yes, I find that problematic, because there are opportunities. Like, if there are male romance writers who are not getting the chance to tell these stories, who are very good writers who write as well as anything that's been done. If they are not getting those writing deals, then that is a huge problem.
That is problematic.
Yeah.
That's very problematic.
And my point, by the way, was not to divert, but my point was to respond to Michelle's comment, which was what you can do in romantic horror and horror and romance. It may very well be defined by who is writing.
Sure.
And I think that there's a truth to that. I think there is a truth to that.
Well, and I think because if you're going to handle something like that, if you don't identify as male, you are not probably going to write it through the male gaze, right? Your lens is going to be different. What you center will be different. And so, once you take this outside of the male gaze, you usually, not always, you usually are going to get rid of most of that misogyny. You're going to usually get rid of most of those things that are put there to satisfy and pacify the male gaze.
Do you know what astonishes me more than anything else is that probably the quintessential, one of the first horror romance pieces ever written, Carmilla.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Was not only written by a man, he was a Jesuit minister.
Yes.
He managed to do it.
Yes. Well, we examine Carmilla in my classes. It's one of my favorite things to look at. And I'm always excited when my students, especially those who are in the LGBTQ community and lesbian community, can kind of go, yeah, but there was this one thing. He just sexualized all this stuff. It didn't have to be all that. It didn't have to be all that sexy. And okay, but he did a relatively good job. He really did. Like, we usually come to that conclusion, right? But I do have students who can say, yeah, but wait, that's sort of like the lesbian fantasy stuff that we see all the time now. I'm not feeling that, And so, but he did a relatively good job. It looks like he put forth a lot of effort.
Yes,
I would agree.
But it's so funny. But Carmilla, the thing that got me most was like the horror element. You know, that was the thing. I mean, that there was two women, or that it was a woman who was this demon, who first kills off the first girl and then comes after the second girl. Man, it's, to me, just the horror of like, you're letting the monster in. You don't realize. Like,
well, you're letting her in.
Scary to me.
Well, because she's sexy. That's why. Because she's sexy.
I don't want to me. It's just that. To me, it's that, someone that you think is your ally or your friend, and they're in. I mean, that's the thing that gets me. That was the scariest thing that you can't tell.
But plus, there was true love between those characters.
Right.
Yeah, but she didn't. But she's thinking that, that thing. That's the scariest thing to me. That let the right one in. That one, don't let that one in.
What I find interesting after this whole conversation, what I found interesting about our entire discussion is the way that we view the romantic elements and the horror elements are so different. Someone who's looking, because it strikes me just now completely as just cross-genre work. Forget it's just mixing genres, and how you approach it. I think you might have said, Gini, that everyone's going to see things differently. Everyone's going to, readers are going to look at and categorize a work a specific way. Authors are going to categorize it a different way. The sellers are going to categorize it a whole different way. And so,
the readers will. The readers are going to categorize it.
The readers, we should throw that in the trash and just You guys, we are already over, if you can believe it.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, we're over like almost 10 minutes, and it was such a good conversation.
Okay.
We're sorry, Consulate. I mean, I have so many more questions because this was just.
We need to do another panel. We need to do another panel. Yeah, we need to do it again.
Seriously,
get the band back together.
Because seriously,
get the band back together.
I really loved it. I have to be honest. And I think, and to be frank with you, I think anyone who watches this, who is considering merging horror and romance or doesn't understand they're going to learn so much from this discussion.
They're going to run in the opposite direction. No.
Maybe they will. I will say I appreciate candor. I appreciate everyone being willing to engage. Thank you. So let's sadly, let's call it out. Where can we find you? Give like where you are on the interwebs. And let's start with Michelle, still the first person I see on my screen.
Okay, so you can find all my stuff at my website, Girl Meets Monster, where I do interviews of other writers and I write a series of posts about monsters I find very attractive as well.
Yes, I love it. It's awesome.
Place we visit very often. Okay, Penelope, go ahead.
You can find me generally, like Michelle says, on my website, penelopeflynn.com. And also on Saturdays in the evening on Talk Shoes, I do a podcast called Discussions from the Other Hood, which focuses on the use of media and entertainment through the gaze of primarily Black creators and Black consumers. So, there we are.
Very nice. Gini?
You can find me at my website, www.ginikoch.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Pinterest. I sort of think I'm on Instagram, but really don't try to find me there. I have a newsletter. You can, really, please don't. That's where my age shows. It's like, I can't make it work. I try so hard. Nothing happens. 50 hours trying to put up a picture of my cat. I can't. It was an embarrassing day, let me just say. You can sign up for my newsletter, hook me up off of my website or my Facebook fan page, Gini Koch, Hairspray and Rock and Roll. I probably have something else, but that'll do.
Rhonda?
Well, I am the outlier who is very tech challenged and who has her teenagers working on a website for her right now. So until that is done, you can usually find me lurking on Twitter at @RJacksonJoseph. If you need to find me, I'll be there. Even if I'm not posting, I'm there.
R. Dr. Joseph?
At @RJacksonJoseph.
R. Jackson Joseph. Okay.
Yes.
Hal?
You can usually find me in the alley behind the Gold Coast bar. No, actually, that was many years ago.
Oh my gosh.
Not that many years ago. HalBodner.com is my website. My husband set it up. I am just starting to learn how to blog, which will be fun. And that is because of Gini's influence. Most of my books, not all of them, are available on Amazon, which is the best place to go. I am rather verbose on Facebook, as you can probably tell. And I'm going to yell at Gini on Read This, which Gini forgot to mention.
I do a book club.
Gini's book club.
Nice. Okay.
Yes. So, yes, Read This
Cool.
every month.
Yes.
So, and Hal is my guest host when it's my books. So he is the guest host when I am book of the month.
That's that age-old question. Whatever possessed you to write that? No, I'm kidding.
You laugh, but he does ask things like that.
Oh my goodness.
Very relevant.
I love it. I love it. If you're ever looking for me, you can find me at elmariewood.com. And I set that website up myself. So I'm constantly playing with it and I can't stop touching it. I don't know what's wrong with me. I need to leave it alone. But anyway, I'm also on Twitter, elmariewood1, and Facebook, elmariewood.
So I got my phone out now trying to do these.
We are going to share it after. We'll share it after.
We can do it after. Yeah.
Okay, yes, please.
Somebody said phone?
We definitely did.
Rhonda and Hal are really sharing a brain. Okay,
Yeah,
Rhonda and Hal are
we really are. Like, we really are like, twinsies. I don't know. I'm glad to meet you, twin.
Folks, stay tuned. This is probably going to have a part 2, I swear. I don't think we're done.
We have to. We have to.
Thank you so much, everybody. Hang out for the after party in a couple minutes, folks. Have a good night, crowd. I hope you learned something for sure.
Night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Night, folks.